the system works it into areas automatically. And then I decided to inspect the tweets. I was like, what type of location is this, just by hand? And I don't know if you can read that, but it says wide awake at an hour when I wish I were wide asleep. So that's, this guy's in bed, can't sleep, and is tweeting from home. So again, this is an interesting example because the automatic classification failed, right? There's no little home icon there. So that's an illustration that there's room to improve the algorithm. And maybe I missed some keywords. Maybe it actually tried to tag a house somewhere else for him that was wrong. So that's interesting. It means there's more work for me to do. And so another thing I did, I was sitting around Friday afternoon between talks, and I thought I'd try to make it more interesting. So I added keyword support, and I just searched for the Next Hope and looked for people who were tweeting about Next Hope. And one that came up that was my favorite was this one. Ben Jackson tells me why I shouldn't tweet this picture. That was a talk about geotags in pictures and learning too much about people. But then I just asked the database. I was like, all right, which of these New Hope or Next Hope tweeters have lots of tweets that are in New York, San Francisco, or Toronto? And I came up with one. Michael, I don't know if you're in the room, but I'd love to talk with you after. So here are just some tweets kind of in the Hotel Penn area. And so if I zoomed out a bit, though, there were tweets all over the New York City greater area. And in particular, I know that Michael likes hanging out on the beach. And what I also know, the system did make a guess as to try to classify his house. And I'm not going to show it because he may be in the room. But again, if you're here, Michael, I'd love to chat with you after and see if I'm right. And if not, see if I can improve it. So the result, I mean, the system, it works really well, right? Like I showed you a case where it nailed it spot on. And again, if you zoom in, you can get right into the crescent, right to the house itself. And that's the beauty of data, right? Like I said, one geotag is just an anecdote, but many are data. And you can use that to even out the errors. Because if your GPS error is somewhat consistent and truly random, then the center of all those tweets is the actual true center over time, right? So even if you're off by 500 meters, if you tweet 1,000 times, that's enough to really pinpoint it down. And so you have to keep in mind that I'm just some guy, right? I've been trying to do classes, I've been working on a thesis, I've been going to concerts apparently, and just trying to find time to work on this as my project. And it works pretty reasonably. And so what could somebody with resources do, right? Paying multiple programmers, paying people to classify what different types of locations are, right? What could people with untold budgets do? No accountability. And it goes further than that. I did this all on data that people chose to make public, right? I mean, nobody forced them to post their geotag tweets, although the dialogues encouraged them to. But other organizations have way more data. So if you, just thinking about Twitter, right? If you tweet via SMS, your cell phone company knows where that came from and can tag that with the location. The NSA knows where that came from and can tag it with your location. But it goes past tweets, right? So I mean, what if you text message somebody? I don't have access to that and I can't do this sort of analysis with it. But there's no reason, the NSA, we know they have wiretaps everywhere, right? It's just a fact. And there's nothing stopping them from, and they know your location. So there's nothing stopping them from building a similar database with all these other disparate pieces of information they have, and just having that much more data to do the analysis with. And I think that's kind of terrifying. But again, what's the big deal? Where you live is public knowledge. Most of us are probably in the phone book, and there are credit reports on us, and there's all sorts of information. So why is this a big deal? Couple reasons. First, I mean, again, like I said, as you post more and more, it stops being trivial facts and starts being something that you can work with and analyze. And more important, it's not just, this is where you live. It's also what you do while you're at home. It's who you're with, because maybe you tag your friend as watching the show with you. Maybe you don't tag your friend, but they're tweeting at the same time too, and they have a cluster of tweets at your house. Now we know that there's this connection there. Maybe you went to a HackerCon and you tweeted from there, and then there were overlapping tweets with other people. Now suddenly you're on lists, right? I mean, who knows what's happening with this? And it's not ephemeral, right? So a conversation takes, we could have a conversation and then it's done, and maybe the person forgets what we talked about, or maybe they remember but they don't tell anybody. But every tweet, and this is true in particular for Twitter, but likely for other data on the internet, basically lives forever at this point. I mean, it's a fact that Google is archiving all of Twitter. It's one of their projects. The Library of Congress is archiving all of Twitter. I'm archiving all of these geotag tweets, right? Like, it's not just big organizations, it's easy. And so big organizations are certainly doing it. And another thing that's interesting is finding where somebody lives. Like, it's not interesting if you know somebody's full name to find where they live. That's pretty easy. But Twitter, we don't know their real names, right? Necessarily. Somebody posting thinking they're anonymous, but geotagging is giving away their location. And based on their location, you can find out their real name. You can find out things about their real life. And, I mean, that's scary. So I'm going to give you a real example of sort of the bigger picture why this is a problem, rather than just we know where this guy lives, right? So we found his house. We could reverse geocode it and get an address if we really wanted to. And guess what? He lives with his brother. So I'm assuming he lives at home. So now we have this connection, right? It's not just him that we have information on. It's also his brother. But it goes further than that, because he tweets about his brother. He doesn't really like his brother. He really doesn't like his brother. And we know his brother breaks the law. So if the police had a quota of drug busts for the month that they need to do, they now have somebody to find, right? And it goes further than that too, right? Because even if the police don't care about this, and hopefully they don't, maybe his brother in 20 years decides to run for government. I don't know. And again, this isn't really a big deal, but when you're running for office, the smallest thing can burn you, right? And so an enterprising journalist could look through the archive of Twitter, could look for tweets at this location, and bam, has some, or maybe it's not a journalist, maybe it's the other political party, right? And so then you can say, oh, he's a pothead. Would you want a pothead making your children's decisions or something like that, right? And just think about the children. There you go, right? There's a smear campaign right there. So that's what worries me. It's when you put it all together. So what more do I want to do? Technically, I want to get more tweets. Right now I'm just looking at 3 cities. I'd love to do it for the world, or have users that aren't in those cities at least be able to say, give me my data, and just retrieve it asynchronously. And that means I need better storage, because like I said, there are a lot of tweets. And I'm on shared hosting, and they're going to get very upset if I keep this up. I'd like to improve the clustering. I showed you that there are sometimes overlaps and little issues like that. And with better clustering, we could just do better analysis. And I'd like to do better classification. Like I said, I showed you 3 examples, one where I know it got it right, one where we know I got it wrong, and one where I'm not sure. Again, Michael, come talk to me after. So I want to use a better model. I basically want to use spam filtering, right? Spam filters can tell within a reasonable error if a message is spam based on not too much information. And I think you could train something to do the same for these different types of locations. And some time-based analysis, right? So this is a map of when I tend to tweet. So typically noon to the afternoon. So you might get a sense that I'm a late riser, that I sleep at night so that I don't work the night shift. You know when I'm asleep, probably, because I'm not tweeting when I'm asleep. And so this sort of analysis you can factor into locations too, right? And just give more data. If every Thursday I tweet something like, hey, I'm at the park playing Frisbee, you know where I go every Thursday, right? And if you're out to rob me, which somebody suggested was a possibility, then you know I'm not at home, or that I'm probably not at home. And finally, I want to do that analysis I was talking about where you look for overlapping clusters from different users, so you can try to make inferences about who knows who and go a bit further. And I'd like to go public with this. I mean, again, the whole point is to draw attention, to put this in people's faces, make them raise awareness, and at least have people be able to make an informed choice whether they want to choose to share geotags or tweets or not. And so I'm kind of trying to decide what I want to do with it right now, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this afterwards, whether just at the microphone or after the session over a beer, just what the best way to present it is. Originally, I was just going to throw all the data out there and let you look up every user and be like, whoa, this is scary. But then I got to thinking, I mean, this is all public data. None of it is like, this is all stuff people chose to share. I've been retrieving it from Twitter, following the terms of service. There's nothing unethical about the collection of data, but I'm worried that there's maybe something unethical about sharing all the conclusions with everybody. despite the fact that they could generate the same report themselves. So I'm kind of torn between what I want to do with that. So like I said, I was going to creep you out with what's possible to do with geotags. And if you'd like to see it live, again, it's running, and I can just come up and talk to me after. We'll go somewhere else where I don't have to worry about my computer so much, and we'll look at it. But I wanted to share some good news, too, because people are choosing to geotag, right? Like, nobody's forcing them to. What are they getting out of it? What are we getting out of it? So here's an example. This isn't geotagging. This is geolocational data, though, that you're choosing to share. If you bring up Google Maps, it tells Google where you are and how fast you're going. And it aggregates that, and it can tell you how long it's going to take you to get to work. That's awesome, right? I mean, that's like Wikipedia. They're channeling people's idle time into something awesome and for the public benefit. And that's great, right? Like, who doesn't want to get to work on time? And another example came up recently in Toronto. There was a G20 summit in Toronto. And I don't know how much press it got outside of Toronto, but inside Toronto, it was a huge deal. We spent a ton of money, over $1 billion on security. Biggest arrests, mass arrests in Canadian history, as far as I know. 1,000 people arrested. New surveillance cameras installed, riots, cop cars on fire, tear gas, all that jazz that comes along with the G20 summit. And what was interesting was trying to follow it and learn what was going on. Twitter was one of the best ways to do it. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of how Twitter was a powerful tool with geotags during the G20. So the first of all, okay, I lied, it's not Twitter, it's Flickr. But they, like I mentioned, they installed a whole bunch of new surveillance cameras in Toronto for the G20, and they promised us they'd be temporary. Yeah, exactly. So a professor at the University of Toronto, Andrew Clement, was skeptical, as I'm sure everyone is, but decided to do something about it. So he bought a phone that could geotag photos, got the list of where they were installing temporary cameras, and walked it and took pictures of them all. And then he posted them publicly on Flickr with geotags. So by doing this, it means that after the summit, anybody who was interested and also skeptical could just wander around, go to the dot on the map, look for whatever the picture was of, and say, hey, the camera's still there, or the camera's not there. And that's a pretty powerful use of using the surveillance tool to turn surveillance back, right? Counter-surveillance. And as far as I know, the last I'd heard, about half of the cameras were gone, which is surprisingly good news. And I'm not sure what's happening with the rest. So another example of where geotagging was really helpful during the G20 summit was there were 2 perspectives of the events. And watching them was quite interesting. There was the mainstream media, which really loved this picture. Really love pictures like this. I mean, that's an awesome. There were some with protesters jumping on the cars, and the burning cars make really good TV, it turns out. But that's not the full story. And so by following the hashtag on Twitter, by looking at geotagged tweets on Twitter as they popped up, you saw pictures coming in that had different perspectives. You saw videos. You got commentary. So, for example, this is one user's worth of tweets during the G20, the clustered. So you can see they kind of wandered around. This is downtown Toronto, where the G20 was, just west of it. And you can see that there's a yellow cluster, just means that there's more tweets there than the bluey-green ones. And so you can see that there's one kind of off to the side. And you might wonder, why did this person tweet so much from this spot, Queen and Spadina? So if you were to Google that, or search for it on Twitter, the very first hit that you would get would be this. So that's a different story than the big picture's painting, right? I mean, the big picture makes it look like there's a riot going on and the cops are struggling to maintain order. Whereas the video that was user-generated and posted to Twitter makes it seem more like there were people just hanging out singing the national anthem who were getting assaulted by police. And that's very different stories, in fact, right? And it's a perspective that for some reason the mainstream media wasn't really picking up on at first. But as time went on and people were tweeting about it and talking about it, we're forced to a little more. So it was an interesting case of not only getting both perspectives, but the sort of ground-up Twitter perspective having an effect on mainstream coverage. And so one